Well, hi everyone. Welcome along to another webinar in the Digital Team series. Today's really about the opportunity to be able to educate people on what is a super important topic when you start to think about offshoring, and that's around thinking about security as well as compliance from a people perspective. And I'm lucky enough to be joined with Jason today from ISO 365, who specializes in compliance services for organizations, not only in the IT sector, but also more broadly as well. So welcome along, Jason. It's wonderful to have you in today's panel today.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me. It's very exciting to be here, and hopefully everyone can learn something or take something away today.
Wonderful. Jason, look, it'd be great to start just to hear a little bit more about ISO 365, but also the work that you do with customers.
ISO 365 basically was born about 12 months ago, just over, and my sole intent was to help organizations and particularly MSPs uplift their security postures and get themselves certified to ISO 27001. So, a bit of a passion of mine, compliance. It's not everyone's cup of tea. But I decided that that's what I was going to do, and I was going to do it a bit differently than most consultants out there. And the difference is that we do it as a managed service. And so, as you know, most people on the call, I'm sure would understand, as a managed service, it means that we're able to, we're in it for the long haul as well, and we're able to help implement and keep you compliant, which is one of the biggest struggles. Once you get certified, things tend to drop off. So we are a little bit different in that regard, but in a nutshell, ISO 365 is about helping organizations get themselves certified to ISO 27001.
Yeah, wonderful. And look, it sounds like what you've done is take that work that often was really difficult. I know, having been through organizations before that have gone through that ISO, whether it's, 9001 from a quality assurance perspective or around security with 27001, that it often felt like there's this whole heap of work that you do at the end of every year or whenever the audit period is, and you run around madly and scramble that. And I think it sounds like what you've been able to do is really turn that into compliance as a service.
It's you've hit the nail on the head, Peter. That's exactly the reason why I started this business. I didn't, I could see that we were heading into a landscape where ISO 27001 was going to become more required, and I knew how laborious it can be to manage, and also that in some cases you don't need to overly complicate things, and so. Yes, the intent is to stay compliant, more like a well-running machine, rather than that inevitable grind towards the end of the year. And if anyone on the call is already certified, and that's how your environment is, you kind of get to that, oh, we've got an audit coming up. What do we do? And so, yeah, we take that pain away because we're managing it on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and look, I imagine that, the need for your services is continuing to really grow, especially with organizations having that real focus on how do they improve their security posture and how do they make sure that they keep up to date with what is really an ever-changing landscape there, not only from a threat perspective, but also the requirements that organizations have, whether that's government regulated or customers that are regulating all of those requirements as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many areas to compliance, and ISO 27001 is just it's one key area, but it does tackle those four areas that hopefully most are familiar with, which is the organizational controls, the people controls, the physical controls, and then the technological controls. So, yeah, absolutely. There's many different aspects of ISO, and also from a controls perspective, but they're all very important.
Yeah. Look, I know in your career, not only in ISO 365, but also with, other organizations you've worked with where you've been focused on compliance, you must have worked with, 100 or more organizations. And I imagine that you've really seen not only the good, the bad, and probably the super ugly as well. What do you think is the one area that is often a gap for IT businesses?
It's a good question. So yes, I have had the fortune of being able to see into many businesses now. And it's hard to say just one. I mean, there's probably one in each of those four areas I was talking about before. Like if you were to take, organizational controls, there's always a lack of policy, right? There's always something around missing policies. And then you take the physical controls and it's the one area that a lot of businesses don't tend to look at, the physical building they're in, filing cabinets, server rooms, comms cabinets, all of that kind of stuff. That's generally another piece that's overlooked. And then from a technological perspective, one of the biggest ones I'd say is around that application control or even that local admin piece. But then it does lead me to the people side, and by far and away, I would say the people side is one of the biggest challenges, because you take something like local admin and you try to take it away, and you all of a sudden get questions. But also people, they call them people controls, but it's not like we can control people, right?
Yeah, look, I think it's really interesting, especially when you start to think that, people is often that big gap. And, we look at a number of the public incidents that have been in the press over the last few years. And as you start to read some of the root cause for some of those, often it's people that's the heart of the problem there with that. And I think often that's the overlooked piece when we think about all of those compliance and security perspectives. So, many might be familiar that in the older versions of ISO 27001 is there were 14 control domains, and in the latest version of that, that's now been reduced to 4 control domains. But of those domains, even though they've been reduced, people is still a massive big component directly with that. And from a digital team perspective, that's really what we do, is we help organizations solve the problem of people, but really from a talent perspective. But we know it's not just about talent. It's how do we extend, across the entire length and breadth in order to not only be able to deliver great people, but also ensure that the compliance and security, is key and part of our DNA. And I think one of the things, and I think it was Kevin Mitnick actually said there, sort of almost the joke about, the gaps in control that are actually seen in people, is that, I think, people don't have configuration management, people don't have patch management, and people also don't have vulnerability management. So hence the need to build these controls around the way that we work with our team members in order to be able to then pick that up. But I think the other interesting thing is, you're seeing from, a compliance perspective and control perspective that people are a challenge. But that's the same challenge that, digital team is seeing. And that's that, 80%, or actually 68% of IT businesses today are unable to find the skills that they need. And that's limiting their growth, but also limiting their ability to focus on, moving the needle forward, whether that's focusing on security compliance or whether that's focusing on other direct best practices directly there. So, it's really interesting to hear that, people is really the heart of it. And they, often people talk about people as the most valuable asset in the business, and it's ensuring that those people are able to then focus on, what really is important and be able to then help grow. So, look, I think a common problem that business is having is being able to find that right talent at the right price. And as a result, I imagine that you're seeing a lot of your customers, Jason, exploring offshore solutions or outsourcing solutions to be able to solve a greater talent pool, but also, the ongoing cost pressures as well. What are you seeing in your space around, customers that are looking at, alternate solutions to find talent to drive their businesses forward?
Yeah, it is interesting. Definitely, majority of the clients that I'm working with do have some kind of either desire to have an offshoring solutions partner, or already have a some kind of partner or presence offshore. So definitely it's growing. It's not something that's shrinking. And we're now getting into different landscapes. It's not just in the one place. We're in multiple areas now. And obviously, it's a very different world these days than it was, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago, especially with how we can control devices and, how we work. And that's a really important piece. It is ultimately, like I was saying before, it is a people control, that we're seeing that needs a lot of work, because at the end of the day, like you were saying before, people need training. They get tired, they get sick. There is no patch management. And in some cases, which is the dangerous part, they get jaded. Okay. And so it's important to make sure that, we lock down things and control what we can control, whether it's technologically or with people, as much as we can. But definitely, having that offshoring presence or that offshoring partner is a growing trend, and definitely wider geographical landscapes.
Yeah. And so what challenges do you see for your customers when they start to explore, offshoring, especially from a compliance perspective? Are there things that you think people need to do differently? Are there things that you're seeing people trip up on? What's the experience that you're seeing that, with that compliance lens on in regards to the approach to offshoring?
Yeah, look, my number one thing is that it absolutely has to be done correctly. Okay, so the legal, regulatory, contractual, and other requirements. Speaking some language from the ISO here, it's definitely the one piece that I think needs to be looked at first, because let's face it, compliance isn't cheap, and making sure that you find a partner, or whether or not people are doing these things themselves, it has to be done correctly, because it puts you at risk. It puts even the person that you're employing over there at risk as well. So for me, one of the biggest challenges is making sure that whoever is doing it correctly. They stay compliant, they remain compliant, and I suppose we don't want to be in a situation where, people are running around at the end of a year, not just from an ISO perspective, but, trying to make sure that they're complying with the relevant employment laws overseas, to make sure that, everyone is doing the right thing, I suppose. So, yeah, definitely for me, the biggest one is compliance.
Yeah, and look, we see that and all the time. And look, I think a great example of that is, like many people, we've just sort of rolled over the end of financial year, and for us, that's meant that we've got our annual cybersecurity review that's come up. So that renewal, and like most organisations, we're facing an increased premium directly with that. But one of the things I've noticed is also the depth of questions that are starting to be asked as well. I went back to just over 12 months ago to, the policy that we had 12 months ago. And it's interesting to see the depth of questions around, do you conduct regular phishing tests? Do you have ongoing, security awareness training? So, not only around the traditional questions about, physical mechanisms such as, routers and firewalls and understanding, intrusion detection systems, but moving into the people space as well. And I think we're quite lucky from a digital team perspective, is that, security is part of our DNA. So when we started the business, we really started with a blank sheet of paper, and knowing that, regulatory controls and compliance controls are incredibly important no matter where a team member's located, whether that's in Australia or whether that's with our team in Sri Lanka, and really taken that approach. And one of the things that we often see with customers as well is they're also struggling with these control mechanisms themselves, just like you've seen, Jason, working with many, many different customers. And so we often help them actually increase their posture. We provide them some of the documentation and processes that we do in order for them to be able to then improve their process as well. And I think one of the things is around control, and different organizations want that flexibility to have control. So it's simple things like, for us, we manage all of our endpoints in Intune. But what we also do is, because we know that some customers need to manage them themselves, we also provide the opportunity for those devices then to be fully enrolled and managed by that. And I think it's those simple things that it's about: how do you make security easy? How do you make control and compliance easy? But how do you make sure that you're actually able to tailor and customize a solution to meet the needs of an individual organization. And I think one of the things that we're seeing with Digital Team is it's not a one size fits all. It's the ability for us to be agile and adapt processes, to meet the needs of the individual organizations, because often they've got a downstream requirement with their customer as well that they're needing to fulfill, and being able to work with a partner that truly is a partner that can then design a solution that meets their individual needs and their individual requirements is what we're seeing. And it's interesting to hear that what you're seeing is that it's very similar. It's the ability to be able to then adapt and evolve based on those changing requirements there. And so, with your experience, Jason, what's the one thing you think that organisations should really make sure that they do whenever they think about, working with an offshore partner?
Yeah, look, I mean, again, the one thing piece is always hard for me, right? I because there's the four separate, call them domains, if you will. I always tend to pick one in each of those areas, because I think it helps you establish a bit of a baseline of what is best practice going forward. But just to touch on what you were saying before as well, the ability to be able to manage an endpoint from the client directly, via their Intune and things like that. That's a huge point of difference. It's not just about whether or not, your partner that your offshoring solutions partner is providing that, but also giving you the ability to also take control of that if you need. That's a very big and really important point. But for me, it's also, it's about adequate working conditions as well. I mean, I was saying before that, staff do get jaded, people get jaded. We want to make sure that where people are working are adequate. It's a fun environment. It's a good environment, because, happy people, it goes a long way to making sure that people continue with their security awareness training, and that they actually, they do think about risk when they're doing certain things, and always having that front of mind. So yeah, we're always looking for someone that integrates well within the MSP business. We don't want, we really don't want to see a team offshore that is siloed or in a separate box or in a separate corner, because that's where a lot of that risk can actually start to be born and bred. So again, love to give you one, but that's probably not not one. But look, if I was to round it all out, again, I probably touch back on the compliance side, right? The compliance piece for me is first and foremost the most important thing. It's not cost, and although that can be driven by a lot of people, it's the compliance. It's making sure that you're doing the right thing in that jurisdiction. We don't know the requirements, I certainly don't. That's where I hand over to you as well, Peter. But we all need to make sure that things aren't just being driven by cost, because we need to make sure we're doing the right things in those jurisdictions, because we can all get in a bit of strife if we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, and look, especially around things like modern slavery becoming front of mind for everyone across the board. And it's interesting that you talk about one of the key things is making sure that people are looked after, and that, they're paid fairly, and that they're rewarded for the efforts that they put in, and as a result they don't get jaded. And I was at an event earlier in the week, and someone was telling me about the $1.50 hot dogs at Costco, and I hadn't heard the story about the history of Costco, and they pointed me to this podcast, and one of the things in the podcast, they were comparing Costco across Walmart, so obviously two massive big brands there in retail. And one of the interesting things was that, the average salary for someone that works at Walmart was about $19 an hour, versus Costco was about $26 an hour. And, not only above being paid extra, an incredibly, strong medical policy and medical insurance that was provided. But the reason that they were talking about that was to compare shrinkage, so theft, unaccounted stock, significantly lower in Costco than what it is in Walmart. And that's simply because people are paid fairly, and people are rewarded for the work that they do. And, that's one of the things that we are really proud of what we do with Digital Team. And, we pay our team in Australian dollars. We make sure that they get really well looked after. They get great medical insurance as well, not only for themselves, but also for their broader family. And we also even include the parents as part of that, because the social fabric and the way that people live in different places is not always the same as Australia, and the family unit doesn't look quite the same there. So, really, from our DNA, it's really about looking after those people, but also designing solutions that meet the needs of the individual organisation. So, for us, it's not about jamming a square peg in a round hole and creating dissatisfaction. It's really about getting the right fit team member. And for us, we recruit for roles. So, one of the key things is not just the technical skills that an individual has, but it's also the cultural fit as well. So the cultural fit for the customer, but also the cultural fit for the customers and customers as well. So, I think all of those little things, when you start to bring those together, create great, happy team members, which is that underpinning about, well, I'll actually think twice about why I clicked the link, because I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So, and then building all of the controls and all of the mechanisms, directly around that as well. But, I liked your answer though there, Jason. Having been from a consulting background, I normally answer those questions with "it depends," but it was good to get some of those insights there from you around what people should be looking for, when they're looking for an offshore partner there. And I think, the reality is that when you're looking to go offshore, one of the key drivers for that is around cost arbitrage, with the second then being able to tap into a broader talent pool. And I think people are more price sensitive now than ever. You can't pick up whether that's, a CRN or an ARN to see, pressure that's coming on from, margins that are being impacted, or, cost of living pressures, etc. I think Hayes released an article earlier this week that says, 77% of team members in Australia will be looking for a new job in the next year. And that's because they're looking to then increase, their salary, and it creates pressure. And so one of the things we've seen is that sometimes people want to go direct. So, the ability for them to go to Fiverr or go to Upwork or even hire somebody direct with that. Is that something that you've seen people do as well, Jason?
Yeah, look, it exists. It's out there. Generally, it's definitely the minority from what I can see. Anyone that I've worked with that is going direct, coming back to that compliance piece, they're doing it correctly. Okay, they're setting up the legal entities, they're doing the right thing by the local governments and the areas they need to be in. Even going as deep as bank accounts and things like that. Right? There's a lot of compliance that needs to be handled when going direct. And so that's the best side that I've seen, and it's worked well. And then there are the sides that, and it's not for lack of, of anything, but just understanding where you do think that potentially you can just, contact someone directly and pay them via a system or a platform that you were talking about before. And, it always comes down to that regulatory piece for me, where it's, if something goes wrong with that person, or, if something happens to that person, what are our legal ramifications? What are our compliance requirements over there? What risk are we putting ourselves under by, yes, we may be saving a little bit of money by going direct, but that person may not necessarily have an office or a team or a culture to join. So for me, it's just a really important piece that, if you're going direct, set it all up correctly as if you were to do it here. And I often use the example of just, flip it around. Imagine if someone from Europe or the US was hiring someone directly here, it would be, we wouldn't even think it was possible to have an employee that wasn't bound by Fair Work or being able to go to those types of regulatory areas for support, or making sure that there's protection there for that employee. So when you flip it around the other way, it's the same over there. And so, yeah, that direct discussion for me is set it up correctly or partner with somebody. Try not to go that direct to the employee kind of into their bank account scenario, because for me, it's just a big risk that's not worth taking.
Yeah, and look, I think one of the things is, there's a number of components about that risk that's associated with hiring direct. But as an old mentor of mine said to me, is focus on what it is that you do really well. And I think for most of the audience, that's delivering amazing IT services for their customers and delighting them every single day of the week. And most people here aren't experts in foreign tax. They're not experts in foreign employment law and other things there. And the more time that you can focus on that one key thing and do it really, really well, the better your business is going to be. And I always think that if you think about your own office, you're typically not emptying the waste paper baskets. You're getting a professional to come in and do that so that you can focus on those higher value tasks. And that's the expertise that Digital Team brings to the table is understanding changes in local legislation, because the same way that legislation changes very quickly in Australia. So we've just rolled over into a new financial year. Superannuations increased from 10 to 10.5%. You're not necessarily going to be aware of similar changes that might occur inside of another country, whether that's Vietnam or India or Sri Lanka. But that's where our expertise come in. And the last thing that you want is just to make a simple mistake like that about not realizing a change has happened and then being impacted directly there. But I think the other thing is what often is an issue is that longevity. And back to sort of the conversation about, one of the core underkeying pillars of actually creating is a culture. And, when you're hiring someone direct, they don't have any other culture that's around them. They're often that lone wolf for you. So, that might work out well for a short period of time. But let's face it, as humans, we're social creatures. We like to go and have a beer with someone on a Friday afternoon. We like to be part of an organisation that's bigger and have a Christmas party and be able to be around that. And that's what we find that, many of our customers start off with one team member with Digital Team. I often use the analogy that when I talk to customers is they like what's written on the box, but they're not quite sure if the contents of the box is going to match. So, they take a low risk of maybe, offshoring one role, and then they find out how well that works and it becomes 2 and it becomes 3 and it becomes 4. But, one of the reasons that they see those benefits is, the social aspect of that. So, the Friday drinks that we do, the beer fridge and the bean bag, just like an amazing, Western office that you'd expect to see, over in Sri Lanka there. The monthly get-togethers that we run. We just ran an amazing end of financial year event where we got all of our team, but also their family and their children to come together. And it was, reminded me of a barbecue at my place where, all of the male team members are sitting around drinking whiskey, and the kids and the mums and that are looking after the kids around the pool. But those sorts of things are really important to be able to then foster that culture and also grow that culture as well. But by having those regular events as well, it's also that opportunity to be able to then continue to educate people and continue to bring through, those requirements and changes. So, whether that's security education, whether that's new software that we've rolled out from a control perspective. So, that ongoing education. And one of the things is we really encourage all of our customers to come to our office as well in Sri Lanka. So, not only to see the office, but also, we've found a number of people use it as a cheeky excuse to go and explore some amazing beaches and some amazing historical landscapes that exist in Sri Lanka. And one of the comments that we constantly get for customers that come into our office is, wow, this is a great setup, from the biometric security access in order to be able to simply get in the front door. But that's before they've actually got through the metal detector and the security guard and being able to get up to that secure 4 cameras throughout the entire premises that are directly in there. And then they come in and they see the kitchen and go, wow, look at all the breakfast cereal and everything else that's stocked, and the beer fridge. And I think it's all of those pieces that you sort of put together, is that there is, as you said, Jason, there is no one solution, but it's really the combination of all of those things that come together, around people, around physical controls, around all of the other regulatory pieces, that really creates a robust solution to then solve, the modern needs of any organisations that are there. And so, Jason, if anyone wants to get in touch with you and wants to learn more about, some of the compliance services or how you can help organizations, whether that's from a quality management perspective or a security perspective, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, look, I always say easiest way is probably on LinkedIn. If you haven't connected with me, feel free to connect and ask me, any question that you like. I'm an open book when it comes to the ISO kind of framework and, how I can help. Everyone comes at it at a different angle. Everyone's got a very unique question. It's not dissimilar to either, an accountant or, a tax expert. Everyone's got a quirky kind of scenario in their organization that they just want to know, hey, is this compliant? Or, what do I need to do to become compliant? Or, how far down the road am I? So please reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's just have a discussion there. We'll tee up a meeting and we'll go from there.
Yeah, fantastic. And look, we'll open up the floor to questions there. So feel free to, pop them in the Q&A there. And, we'd love to be able to sort of answer any questions with that you might have that are top of mind for you. And so there's a question here about communication, and it's the question is what have you seen work well in regards to ensuring that there's ongoing communication with team members? So, any comments on that, Jason, in regards to comms?
Yeah, I would say that it's really important to consider your team offshore as a part of your local team. If you can just bridge that gap in your mind and make sure that you bring them into every piece of communication, whether that's on Teams or Slack or whatever instance, you're running, bring them in, make sure that they're not isolated, because, especially when it comes to the ISO side of things, it's really important that everybody is aware of changes to some of your policies or changes to some of the legal requirements that are out there. And so communication for me is imperative. We want to make sure that they're included in every single piece of comms, just like a local team would be. Yeah, really important on that front.
Yeah, and look, that's something we foster all the time. And look, one of the things that we believe is that all of our team members work for two teams. They work on a day-to-day basis dedicated for our customers. And we want them to be part of their all hands, part of their daily huddles and stand-ups. And really, they're an extension of that team. They just happen to be sitting in Sri Lanka rather than Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne, like even down to the fact of, wearing that customer's polo shirt. But we also believe that what we do is create teams inside of teams. So, we have our own regular cadence as well, communicating with our team members, whether that's the 3-minute Friday updates that we do, whether that's the WhatsApp channel that's always lit up like a Christmas tree with, lots of information, even down to the simple things like our Help Me channel, which is really almost that technical communication. Hey, I'm stuck using Purview or I need some assistance with something else. But also that platform just to keep people engaged, but also people updated with everything that's going on. So yeah, great question in regards to sort of the effective, comms mechanisms as well. And so there's another question here, and this is one I often hear is what about things like IP? How do you protect confidentiality? What things should we be thinking about there? So, what do you see with customers, Jason, in regards to confidentiality and protecting IP?
Yeah, so we mainly call this around the HR security piece, and it's just really important. Like we would in locally, I'll say we've got confidentiality clauses in our contracts. We've got intellectual property clauses, as well as disciplinary clauses as well. And this is really important to reflect, offshore as well. A lot of NDAs get signed offshore, which is fine, but I always say that, it's important to have that as well as an employment contract that makes sure that, everyone is staying compliant as far as confidentiality is concerned, or even IP. You just don't want to get stuck into a messy situation there. So yeah, I always just go back to, it's just really important to making sure you treat them in the same way that you treat your local team, because it's really important, that we're all bound, I suppose, by the same rules. And there is an ISO, quirk or an ISO control that is about reminding staff about their obligations to confidentiality upon termination. And so that doesn't matter where they are in the world. That is something we need to stay compliant to. So really important to have contracts in place that hit all of those areas.
Yeah, and look, I always think these things are like a layer of the onion. There's multiple layers that you need to have, and that's certainly something that we put in place as a very robust employment contracts and processes and controls from a HR perspective. But I think the other thing for organizations that are thinking about offshoring as well is also understanding, the IP in Australia is very well protected. There's a really robust legal system there in order to be able to, protect the owner of the IP. Also thinking about when you're moving into a new jurisdiction, whether that's, the Philippines or whether that's, Ukraine, wherever it might be that you're thinking, is also having an understanding of the broader legal system. And I think, a little sort of cheat is just to have a look at the Budapest Treaty to see if that particular country is aligned to the Budapest Treaty in regards to protection of IP. So Australia is certainly ratified directly against that treaty, and Sri Lanka as well is ratified against that treaty. But one of the things you will find is that many of the other common locations do not protect IP in the same mechanism and are not actually party to the Budapest Treaty. So just something to think about there, when you're looking at not only an offshore provider, but also the location that you're looking to offshore in as well, because there's definitely some quirks there that can trip you up. And I think, that IP and secret source is so important to many IT businesses because that's what differentiates them. And we've got another question about frameworks as well. So yeah, any particular frameworks or best practices you'd recommend to are followed to maintain IT compliance in regards to that. So, yeah, so any frameworks that or best practices you would recommend more broadly around compliance. I think I know what you're going to say about 27001 there, but any other frameworks you'd recommend, Jason?
Yeah, so look, it's a great question, and it's one that I field that question most days, and I suppose that the answer is it's not generally ISO 27001 or it's generally ISO 27001 and. So if you take the CIS controls or even NIST, you've got a lot of MSPs or IT providers out there that will align to one of those, and that's perfectly fine. It doesn't mean that you're in a different camp as such. ISO 27001 is just a way to globally ratify or globally certify what you're doing and getting a well-deserved certificate at the end of the day to show that you've opened your doors to a compliance check through certified auditors to be able to give confidence through to your supply chain, but also through to your clients. So, it doesn't necessarily matter which framework you choose because there are many that are out there to align to. Ultimately, ISO 27001 will cover most bases on a lot of those different controls. However, those other controls like NIST and the CIS controls are a lot more prescriptive with the controls that need to be in place, whereas 27001 is an information security management system, and it's how we manage our information. And as we've discussed today, people have a big part to play, I should say, in that as well.
Yeah, look, I think, what we see, similar to what you said there, Jason, it is no just one silver bullet or one solution. It's a number of different mechanisms that are in place there. And, I know our team, not only from a 27001 perspective, but also around, NIST controls as well, but also, follow a number of other, practices that are around, building out that robust mechanism. And look, we'd certainly encourage customers, we'd love if you've got questions about that, we'd love to be able to run you through in more detail. And one of the things is, we open up our team to that as well. So you can talk directly to, our head of our IT team, our head of our people and culture, our head of the HR, and really hear about the things that they're doing. Because I think, it's all well and good on a marketing brochure just to have a number of green ticks, but, we live, eat and breathe this every single day, and, encourage our customers to be able to then, talk directly to the team that are making the magic happen and understand this. So I always say that there's, so many people in my team that are far better looking and far smarter than me. And we'd really encourage, if you're thinking about an offshoring solution, we'd love to be able to introduce you to them to be able to then find out how we deliver that capability and how we ensure, the ongoing compliance of not only your team, but the ongoing compliance of your business as well and the services that you deliver as well. So look, I think that sort of wraps it up today. There's no other questions that have popped up in the chat there. And look, Jason, I want to say a massive big thank you. Look, I've learned a lot about what your business does, and I think for any IT organisation that's thinking about needing compliance, I definitely encourage them to explore the compliance as a service option. We've recommended a number of customers to Jason, and they've been delighted with how they really transform what can be very onerous task and enable them to focus on what they do really well. So definitely encourage you once again to reach out to Jason. But look, if there's anything that we can help you from a digital team perspective to find the right people at the right price, we'd love the opportunity to talk further with you. So once again, Jason, appreciate all of your insights on to what is such a super important topic for anyone that's looking at offshoring solutions.
No, thank you as well, Peter, for having me. It was great to chat. And as I said at the start, hopefully everyone was able to take something away from today. So again, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now.
Okay.